Very good afternoon to all of you. Now to chair the fourth session, we have Dr. Janvi Rao ma'am, Professor, Vice Principal in Pune College of Pharmacy, Dean of Faculty of Pharmaceutical Science, and Member of Board of Management, Bharati Vidyapeeth Deemed University, Pune. Madam has completed her Master of Pharmacy from ICT, formerly Bombay University Department of Chemical Technology, Mumbai, and did her doctoral from Bharati Vidyapeeth deemed to be university. She has published more than 70 research articles and presented more than 30 papers in national and international conference. She has been a recipient of Bharati Vidyapeeth Seva Gaurav Puraskar 2009, IPC Trust, the Pharmacy Teacher of Award 2007-2008, and Best Research Paper Award by PD Sethi Annual Award in 2010, 2011, and 2015. She has authored a book also. I request Rao ma'am to take over the session. Thank you, ma'am.
Hello.
Yes, Rao ma'am.
Good afternoon to everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Gauri Godbole, Madam, for this QIP program. Can I have the next slide, please? It's a very, very long introduction for her, but we have cut short to make it a little, crisp. So I'd be introducing Godbole ma'am. She is a registered pharmacist with extensive experience in clinical pharmacy practice at various multidisciplinary teaching hospitals across Australia. And she has experience in collaborative decision making as a part of various local, state, and national committees. And she has completed her B.Pharm from University of Pune and Masters of Clinical Pharmacy from University of South Australia, Adelaide. She is a board certified geriatric pharmacist. She is currently working as a team leader, aged care and mental health units, senior clinical pharmacist, and Central Coast Local Health District. She has contributed to various in-house guidelines and practices at CCLHD, and also she's a reviewer for Journal of Pharmacy Practice and Research, Geriatric Therapeutic Section. And she works in collaboration with University of Newcastle as a research partnership for reviewing and participating in grants and applications. She is awarded as 2017 at SHPA NSW Branch Early Career Pharmacist Award. And she's also been a recipient of CCLHD Research Symposium category supporting people. She has been a runners-up. Jerry Grabs, a collaborative pharmacy in service initiative for improved patient outcome. Selected for inaugural SHPA Leadership Enrichment and Advancement in Pharmacy program in 2019. She is also a member of SHPA, Board of Pharmacy Specialties, American Society of Consultant Pharmacists, and member of Bilingual Health Professional Network of National Prescribing Services. And this is just a small introduction of Ms. Gauri Godbole ma'am, and her CV runs into pages. And I have the pleasure of inviting you, Gauri, for our QIP program. Over to you, Gauri.
Thank you so much, Jannavi ma'am, for that really generous introduction. It's just great. I just heard all about you as well. I'm nowhere near to your achievements, but thank you so much for such really kind introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
That's excellent. I'm just going to try and mirror my presentation now. Share screen. Sorry about that. What happened here? Sorry about that. I'm just going to.
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Yeah, for some reason yeah, there you go. That's much better. Excellent. Okay, so without further ado, I'll start my presentation because I've got a fair few slides. My apologies. When I get writing, I have no constraint of time. My sincere apologies. Just to start with, I have no conflict of interest to declare. So today I'll be giving a quick introduction about geriatrics. Why is it important to have skills in geries? Main aspects affecting geriatric care, some pharmacokinetic and dynamic changes in older age, some drug selection principles of prescribing and represcribing in geriatrics, CGA, Comprehensive Geriatric Assessment, what is it and what's the pharmacist role and how we can help in medication safety in particular. I have gotten rid of the case study, my apologies, it's just that otherwise it would have gone for up to 2 hours. So just to start with, I wanted to give you a bit of an overview of a definition of an older person, basically. There was a quite infamous physician. He was called as father of modern medicine, William Osler, who in 1889 made a very controversial statement as men over 40 years are relatively useless, as they beyond like they are the best between 25 and 40, and over 60 are absolutely useless. Now, this obviously wouldn't sit anywhere good with my hubby or my father, obviously. And Osler would have been a very infamous person in this day and age. And we have come quite far from that. I just wanted to kind of highlight that. So how do we define an older person? So in general, to make things easy for us, they say that over 65 year of age is when a person is defined as an older person. Now, in about 11, 12 years of my practice, I have seen the oldest person I have taken care of was 108 years old. He has sadly passed away now, but that gentleman was driving until he was 100. So by no ways or means or definition, he fitted in that category of older person, really. That 65 age is really defined to ensure that some social security benefits in some countries, they start getting paid after 65. In Australia, some aged care or nursing home benefits start after 65 years of age as well. And as we know, with modern medicine, people live longer, basically. So they could be robust well into their 80s, and some nanogenarians in their 90s are quite fit as well. However, there is a category of people who, in their perhaps late 50s or maybe mid 50s or late 40s could also have all those geriatric syndromes, and would be categorized as perhaps geriatrics. In Australia, indigenous population, sadly, they have lesser life expectancy, so their cutoff for being older might even start at the age of 50. So really speaking, there shouldn't be, or there isn't a cutoff point, but for practicality purposes, we say it is 65 years of age. Now this Fauja Singh Ji, he's a fantastic example when we say age is just a number. He ran a marathon at 101 age. Now one can only imagine running a marathon at 101 age. So he's a classic example that age is just a number, really. Now, why do we really need skills in geriatrics? Why is it so important? Now, when I was studying pharmacy in India long time ago, obviously, the more focus at the time perhaps was on medication manufacturing. Perhaps clinical pharmacy at the time in early 2000s was not as predominant. But when I came here in Australia, Australian majority of Australian population. So Australian population is aging, as we know. However, when I looked up a little bit into it for the purposes of this presentation, apparently 4 million of Indian people are suffering from some sort of dementia. So it could be the classic Alzheimer's related dementia, or vascular dementia, those kind of dementias, or even like a B12 folate deficiency dementias kind of thing. But certainly that's the reason why even in developing countries, it's very important to have an understanding of geriatrics, and we should be, all the healthcare professionals should be really empowered to with the basic principles of geriatrics and how to look after an older person. Just with the Australian picture, the population age 65 or older is projected to increase to about 24.5, so that will be 24.5%, 25% of population in 2061 that will be over 65. Lifetime risk of acquiring aged care homes in Australia is estimated to be 20% for men and 34% for women. And of course, with age, sometimes unfortunately comes chronic illnesses, so like hypertension, hyperlipidemia, and osteoarthritis, which then has a ripple effect on medical cost, prescriptions, nursing home accommodations, allied health consort, and the list just goes on. So that is one of the reasons why we should be really knowing more about geriatrics as well. And of course, then we have all these polymorbidity, multimorbidity issues, including polypharmacy, altered pharmacokinetic and dynamic properties in older people, which we will discuss a bit quickly a bit later. Then increased susceptibility for adverse drug reactions. Of course, that's a very important intervention point for pharmacists. Atypical presentation of illnesses. For example, people with older adults with infections coming in with delirium. So delirium, as we all know, is a medical emergency basically, and a lot of times they come into the emergency department with a delirium, and then of course we have to be the Sherlock Holmes of medicine to find out why they're delirious, and why is the presenting complaint, what's the relationship between delirium and the presenting complaint, obviously, and of course the medications eventually. There's quite a limited evidence with respect to effectiveness and safety of medications in older adults. They are people with polymorbidity or comorbidity are often excluded from clinical trials, unfortunately. The goals of care is quite different, to be honest, and I will discuss the holistic nature of geriatrics a little bit later. But the goal might not be to live for another 25 years. The goal might be perhaps to live a comfortable, pain-free life, and that's a good enough goal. That's actually a very respectful goal to have. And higher prevalence of impaired function, of course, like cognitive decline, hearing decline, and all those kind of things. When I was invited very kindly to present in this forum, I thought I might include a little bit of quality improvement in geriatrics. In geriatrics, it's really all about medication safety. I'll explain that a bit later, but shortest dose for the smallest amount of time, or smallest dose for the shortest amount of time, is the mantra in geriatrics, basically. I thought it was very opportune to include this slide here, that in geriatrics there are number of QI opportunities, and what I've learned from my practice on the wards, it gets really busy. Of course, you're going on ward rounds with doctors, you have allied health professionals on the ward rounds, nurses. So it's a great idea to aim for lower hanging fruits, and by that I mean just snippets of studies. Say for example, you want to look at some retrospective audits. So say anticoagulants, warfarin, or the newer anticoagulants? How is it being utilized in my ward? What are the doses? For example, all the newer anticoagulants, we need to be very mindful how they're eliminated, what dose need to be given for, how long it needs to be given as well. So these are low-hanging fruits, and they are some very classic, I guess, points for medication safety on a geriatric ward. Sometimes we don't have to aim, it's not all about rocket science. So one of my great mentor at University of South Australia always told me, it's not all about, you just need to do a randomized controlled trial or a cohort study, not necessarily. Just or even on a ward round, to understand how medications are charted, and doing a quick audit from that is actually quite beneficial as well. I've mentioned very briefly about drug utilization evaluation research as well, that you can do very easily on a ward level. Collaborations with some other healthcare professionals, absolutely important in, I guess, any pharmacy practice or medical practice, but in geriatrics it's far more important, because as I will mention to you a bit later, it's a holistic science, so there are a lot of stakeholders in looking after one patient. So you would achieve a lot more by collaborating with other healthcare professionals, absolutely. And I'll give you a couple of examples a bit later. And in this presentation, I'll give you just a bit of a broad overview of some areas of research that you can focus on, or you can base some studies on when you go back to your practice. As I mentioned, it's a multidisciplinary approach. Of course, you're working with physicians. So not long ago, our group of geriatricians, pharmacists, social workers, and physiotherapists, there was a study done on falls prevention, basically on the ward, what strategies we could utilize, of course, some modifications in the room itself for the patient, and then, of course, medication safety, what medications they are on, what they came in on, and what they're on in hospital, and what they're getting on discharge, which can increase propensity of falls, for example. So it was a seemingly simple kind of intervention, but very effective. Of course, with nursing staff. So Ram, I'm kindly in the introduction mentioned about that Jerry Grabs project I did. That was actually with the nursing staff. So what I did was I chose one topic per month. So for example, anticoagulants, I just love anticoagulants. So I'll just give you an example of that. So I chose anticoagulants, and I prepared really small presentations, which lasted for no more than 10 to 12 minutes. And I repeated that presentation every month. So for 4 weeks, I repeated the same presentation for different sets of nursing staff. And at the end, we compared their knowledge from before and after. And we found that, they retained more information, because the presentation was so like just a snippet on what really we need to know. So you can absolutely make nursing staff as your great medication safety crusader. Of course, your other pharmacy colleagues, physiotherapist, very helpful. We do a little initiative called as a stepping on program, in which our physiotherapists invite pharmacists in their balance and falls prevention program, in which we give a little lecture to patients and their families as to what to look out for to prevent falls in terms of medications. So benzodiazepines, avoiding those, and medications that can cause sedation. So quite helpful to collaborate with other healthcare professionals. Occupational therapists, of course, they can suggest modifications in patients' surroundings. Basically, speech pathologists, I'll quickly mention about these amazing class of allied health professionals. So often, older patients may have like swallowing difficulty. They might have peg tube, or they can only have thickened fluids or something like that. these speech pathologists are so fantastic. They usually come to pharmacy or send us an email or text message saying, "Hey Gauri, just reviewed Mrs. Smith. She can only have thickened fluids. You can crush medications. Can you review her medication?" So it is a fantastic opportunity for pharmacists then to go and review the medications. In Australia, we are very lucky to have a publication called as Don't Rush to Crush. I've given a link of that at the end of my presentation. I'm very fortunate to be reviewing a few chapters of this book as well in the next edition. Great book which gives you simple, succinct I guess options as to if you can't crush a medication, what can you do? Because not all medications can be crushed. For example, methotrexate. Now it's a cytotoxic drug. You can't be just crushing it like that, or some medications are hazardous drugs, if they're handled by women of childbearing age. So like nurses, if they are handling or crushing medications, that's very hazardous. So great little book or publication we have which helps us with that. Patient carers, absolutely your partners in patient safety, medication safety. Social workers, we did a project with social workers to reduce our time in giving out medication, discharge medications basically. How can we organize that a bit better to make sure that at the end of that discharge process, we have enough time to go through the medications with the patient. And of course, last but not the least, the patient. So very recently, we did a small project to understand patients' understanding of their anticoagulation drugs. Again, it's all about anticoagulants to me. But it's such an amazing little snippet of project that we finished within 4 weeks, but gave us a much deeper understanding of what older people perceive their anticoagulation as, and each team comes in and out and of that meeting, and speak about their patients basically. But of course, every day as well, nurses hand over patients to each shift, doctors hand over patients to each shift, and pharmacist also has a major input in that. Like we rely a lot on documentation at that point. So of course, some age-related physiological changes affect how we care for older people. As we know that, for example, volume of distribution, there is increase of fat content in the body and decrease of body water. In babies, it's exactly the opposite. But for example, in older people, if you give diazepam, it will have a massive distribution in older adults because it distributes in fats basically. That's why for any benzodiazepine, smallest dose for the shortest period of time is the mantra. And of course, you can't just stop these medications just as cold turkey, because then it can cause rebound effects as well. So it's a very fine balance between dosing a medication and reducing the dose as well. Of course, protein binding as well. So there's a lower serum albumin in frail, unware elderly people. It could be because of malnutrition as well. And then there are some drugs, as you know, like phenytoin, which follows that zero order kinetics, and could have major effects if you just increase its dose, uh, like as in by 100 milligram or whatever. That's why they recommend to increase it very slowly, like by 30 milligrams or so. So it's quite important to understand what changes in physiology happen in older people, and then how each medication's metabolism changes in older people. Then of course pharmacodynamic changes, so increased sensitivity to medications as well. And then it's mainly due to altered homeostasis in older people, so like impaired balance and posture maintenance as well. Classic example would be orthostatic hypotension. Older people are quite susceptible to that. And of course altered receptor or tissue sensitivity, like medications crossing the blood-brain barrier. I quite like this little diagram here to explain why we need to be so careful about medications or function in general in older people. So like for a fit older person, they perhaps have a fall. and they might go back to being independent again. But in a frail older person, they have a fall, they would go down to becoming dependent on other people, but then unfortunately will never come back to that same level of independence. So it's quite important to, I guess, understand that any slight change in medication can have quite massive repercussions in older people. There's a really good publication called as Older, Wiser, Safer. It's an old uh, presentation, but or old, I guess, uh, excuse me for a second. Yes, ma'am. Apologies. So basically, the number of concurrently taken medications and I guess propensity to have geriatric syndrome is quite interesting. Because apparently four and a half or more medications, the mortality increases pretty drastically, or 5.5 medications, disability increases quite drastically. So if you look at a patient with, say, for example, who come in with stroke, straight away they are in that category of having 5.5 medications. So we are already increasing their propensity for geriatric syndromes then and there. Okay, so drug selection principles in older adults. So prescribing for older people, I will discuss very quickly polypharmacy, ADRs, and I want to focus mainly on de-prescribing today as well. So polypharmacy in general, we define as 4 or more medications. And then there is a new term called as hyperpolypharmacy, where they have 10 or more regular medications. And then, of course, a medication, if it is taken more often, a classic example would be Parkinson's disease medications. That is also considered as polypharmacy. So sometimes they have to take medications every 2 hours to maintain their mobility, and that is also that also comes in category of polypharmacy. Now, why is there so much polypharmacy? I guess a single disease approach. So just looking at one disease in particular, and not looking at looking at a holistic picture can cause this kind of issue. Continuation of medications that are no longer necessary. Classic example is proton pump inhibitors, for example, pantoprazole or esomeprazole or omeprazole. I've seen older people coming into our ward taking it for 20 odd years, and when you ask them why you're taking it, oh, I had a bit of a reflux 20 years ago, but now I'm fine. I'm like, yeah, I understand you're fine because you're taking pantoprazole, but your B12 level is non-existent. That's because you're not able to absorb it, for example. So it's quite important to have that little, I guess, a bit of a pragmatic view on medication review as to why the patient is still taking this medication. That might help patient immensely as well. Maybe pharmaceutical company influence, not sure, and pressure from patients, that when I go to doctor, the doctor must give me a medication, otherwise that's a no good doctor. It's actually quite a big mentality, which is not very good to have, obviously. Of course, clinical implications such as falls, exhaustion, and cognitive impairment obviously are quite big factors in causing of polypharmacy. Paradoxically, older people using 5 or more medications apparently are usually undertreated as well for a lot of their conditions. So that's why that medication safety and medication review is so important in older people. This is what I was talking about, the prescribing cascade. So someone taking ACE inhibitor, having first dose, for example, postural hypotension or dizziness, and then given prochlorperazine, obviously, and has a fall because of that. Or classic example would be ACE inhibitor causing cough, and given a cough mixture because of that, and that causing sedation. That's a classic prescribing cascade as well. Now, approximately 15% of patients will stop their treatment, unfortunately, without telling their doctors. So GPs, their general practitioners, so our local doctors, basically, and poor communication between healthcare professionals. So as a pharmacist, we can be a medication safety crusaders here and give patients medication list, basically, at each encounter in hospital, and they can take excuse me, and they can take medication list with them to every I guess prescriber, and in that way people will have something to go by. That's like we do that for every patient on discharge in our hospital, which proves to be very helpful for them. And of course, like, ADR, so adverse drug reactions being misinterpreted. For example, metoclopramide causing movement disorder, and that is getting misinterpreted as Parkinson's disease. So classic prescribing cascade can begin there as well. Increased risk of ADRs with medications like cholinergics, antipsychotics, benzodiazepines, and hypnotics and sedatives, of course. Quite interestingly, up to 15% of hospitalizations of older people in Australia are drug related. So we can do better. We can definitely improve in that, and 20% of these admissions are preventable. So definitely I guess promote some good prescribing and medication review practices to prevent that. Of course, probability of interaction increases with the number of medications you take. So I remember the highest number of medications I've seen a patient come in on was 26. And of course, we did massive deprescribing in that patient as far as we can, and gave a plan to the general practitioner when they went back to their nursing home as to, look, the 26 is way too many medications. This patient is not improving. What are their goals of care? And then so on and so forth. And we reduced that number quite significantly before they went back to the nursing home. So of course, starting slow, using the lowest effective maintenance dose, simplifying the regime, and prescribing from a limited range of drugs. Obviously, you can't do that for aggressive, like diseases where aggressive treatment is necessary, like cancer treatment, for example. Now, deprescribing, this is very close to my heart. A very dear friend of mine once had mentioned, actually, that first author in that reference, that, how you prescribe medications or you trial a medication. Deprescribing is really detrialing the medications, that you trial and then you detrial. Does this patient really need this medication? It's an individualized multi-step cooperative process, including the patient and the families. Obviously, not one person can make that decision. Now, deprescribing of inappropriate medications aims to minimize the risk of polypharmacy related negative effects, obviously, like non-adherence. If you are on 26 medications, very unlikely you're going to take all of those every day. So of course, cost of medications as well, adverse effect, and poor medical outcomes as well. When should it be considered? Patients coming with a new symptom, for example, they are very frail, receiving high risk medications. They are perceiving, like, say, for example, medications that continue beyond their perceived effect. For example, bisphosphonates. After 5 years, do you really need to be on these medications? In older adults, when they so after taking bisphosphonates, you must be aware you need to be upright, to prevent issues to your esophagus, obviously. Can they really stay upright? If it's a frail older person hardly able to sit upright, then you're causing more harm than any benefit to the patient. Of course, it should be considered if they come in with falls, end stage disease, and of course the prescribing cascade. Now, does it help? Yes, absolutely, it helps. It increases patients' quality of life with decreased side effects. Drug withdrawal trials are quite good for patient empowerment as well. Reduce financial cost. Again, 26 medications multiplied by what, if they are on pension, $5.60 per month supply, you can do the math, it is too expensive. And of course, reduced hospitalizations. So yeah, funny enough, a lot of my patients do say, oh, I've become a rattle bag, I'm rattling because I take so many medications. Every hospital admission is a great opportunity to collaborate with prescribers to perhaps suggest some deprescribing of medications, or making them more, I guess, appropriate for the patient. There are many, I guess, um, criterias that you can use for deprescribing, like stop-start criteria, BS criteria. They all identify potentially inappropriate medications, PIMS they are called. Now every I guess such algorithm has issues. So I guess individualizing for that patient, for that amount of time, for that particular episode is quite important. I quite like this little SAIL acronym, SAIL tool, because it is quite simple to remember. So keeping the drug regime as simple as possible, understanding the potential adverse effects of each drug, basically, of course, whenever practical, choose drugs with broad than narrow therapeutic indices, of course. Each prescribed drug should have a clear indication for that patient, and list the name and dosage of each drug in patient chart. And I would go even further to give that medication. When you give that medication list to the patient, why are you taking this medication? What's the generic name of the medication? So not like brand name of pantoprazole, but give pantoprazole granules, whatever dose you're taking, why you're taking, and how long you need to be taking this for. So deprescribing process, of course, consider the patient, take a thorough medication history. A lot of times patients forget to tell you their complementary medications, like, oh, I'm taking St. John's wort. Oh, well, that's not a medication, it's over the counter. Well, absolutely not. It interacts with everything under the sun, as we know. So quite important to ask those questions. Do you take any eye drops? You take any puffers or inhalers, any medication patches, or anything that's kept in the fridge? Sometimes they forget to tell you if they're taking medications that are kept in the fridge. So quite important to ask those questions. Some targets of deprescribing. So again, low hanging fruits, of course, if they have heart conditions, you're not going to target heart medications first, obviously. So are there any low hanging fruits in that as well? Why is this patient taking calcium supplements? Now, for example, they don't need it, just as an example. Or their vitamin D levels are horrible. Are they taking vitamin D? So that's optimization of medication as well. And then planning and withdrawing those medications and monitoring it, of course. So this is just the same thing, really. I've just written that in a little bit more broader way. Of course, discussing it with patient is very important, and it's a very shared decision making. So not just the prescriber just doesn't make a decision, or pharmacist can suggest, obviously, but I've mentioned it a little bit later. Documentation is of paramount importance, that this decision was a shared decision between patient, carer, doctors, and everybody else as well. Of course, it is also governed by prescribers' previous, basically, prescribers' previous experience with deprescribing as well, goals of care, and medication adherence as well, of course. Yeah, I cannot emphasize good documentation enough in that, because a lot of prescribers might have that fear of litigation, that this doctor recommended this, stopping this medication, and I'm having this issue now sue the doctor. Now, of course, a lot of times that's the fear, and that's why a good documentation is very important, that it also came from the patient or patient's family, that yes, we want to trial getting rid of this medication as well. Ongoing medication review is very important. And other thing is very important is to empower the patient and family as to what to do if the symptoms come back. Classic example of proton pump inhibitors again. They have been taking pantoprazole for last, say, 20 years at 40 milligrams daily. You can't just stop it cold turkey like that. They will have rebound gastritis. So okay, so you can take 20 milligrams for 1 to 3 weeks, whatever, and then take it alternate daily. Then they take it every 3 days, and then stop it. And if the symptoms come back, okay, here is a prescription of 20 milligram, you can start on a lower dose again, or something like that. Just empowering the patients as to what to do is quite important. In Australia, we have national prescribing services, which actually have great algorithms that GPs can just actually write their deprescribing algorithm as to do like a plan and just give it to the patient as well. So of course, the patients and prescriber barriers to deprescribing is that fear of the illness coming back. Obviously, psychological impact as well. Oh, is it the end of my life? I have had a patient once tell me, oh, like it's good that, doctor's suggesting me getting rid of this medication, but does that mean I'm going to die because, it's end of my life? What's the what good it's going to do for me continuing these medications? So of course, empowering the patient that way, that no, that's not the case. Fear of litigation, as I mentioned. So yeah, solution to that psychological impact thing could be counseling patients on managing rebound symptoms, and just giving that little bit of assurance is quite important, and follow up with their local doctor. So you can't just give a deprescribing regime and then say see you later. They have to be followed up by their local doctor as well. Of course, many drugs are indicated to delay mortality. So despite this concern, there was a systematic review of deprescribing. It found no change in mortality overall, unfortunately, but definitely the mortality decreased, which was just fantastic. So I guess, it's quite important to choose what you really want to do with medications, as to there are choose your target quite wisely. That's what basically that means. Yeah, so in the setting of aged care facilities, potential barrier for pharmacists to deprescribe was lack of continuity of nursing staff, which made it quite difficult to certain goals of care. So barriers could be many. I guess that's what I wanted to emphasize here. But definitely a trial of deprescribing or a suggestion of that is quite worth it. Yeah, so basically undertreatment is also paradoxically associated with polypharmacy. So more than 40% of older people are thought to be undertreated for like common ailments like heart failure, for example. Patients who are not able to actually voice their pain, for example, patients with dementia, there is a special pain scale called as PainAid, which actually helps people with dementia, I guess, tell how much pain they are in. So these things are quite handy to know and suggest while you're doing board rounds as well. And while prescriber concerns regarding polypharmacy, like treatment burden, cost, I guess if you balance that against all the good things, then certainly you have to give it a go. As I already mentioned to you, pharmacist role is to empower patients, empower clinicians, and empower carers. Basically, knowledge of duration of medication use as well is quite important. Conducting home medication reviews, so that's what that means, HMR. So in Australia, we do have this facility of going to patients' homes and looking at their medications, doing a review, how they store the medications, and then sending a report back to the local doctor. A similar thing can be done for residential medication management as well, if they are in nursing homes as well. And of course, hospital pharmacists, we regularly participate in multi-D meetings and give our 2 cents worth in patient care, of course. Ethics in deprescribing, so rights to equal treatment versus long-term treatment. So as I said, everything comes with, I guess, a pitfall. So quite important to take decisions as a team for the patient, basically, with patient's consent, obviously. I like this little paper here. You can have a look at it later. It's just summarizes deep prescribing in older people as well. This little slide tells you a lot of like great resources. That the third resource there, the New South Wales tag, they have some fantastic resources in prescribing, and also actually polypharmacy that literally just got published not long ago. So jump on their websites and have a look. They're pretty good websites. And now, as I mentioned, comprehensive geriatric review comprises of a lot of things. So basically functional status, cognitive status, medical problems, geriatric giants, medications, that is our domain, obviously. But it also then has all these other things to look at, like nutritional status or social issues or their mood, how they are doing, basically. So I guess with CGA, the New Horizons in CGA is also a pharmacist comprehensive geriatric assessment as well, in which it's a structured approach to look after an older patient in hospital, basically. As I mentioned before, up-to-date medication history is of paramount importance in any geriatric care, basically individualizing the treatment, communication between secondary and primary care, continuing review of medications, every patient, every time, every admission, education of the patient and carer, and education of healthcare providers. So we, on a regular basis, have in-services to doctors, to allied health professionals, for nursing staff as well. And of course, we attend a lot of their in-services as well to just get an insight into what they do and how we can improve our service by understanding their service as well. So of course, as I've already mentioned to you before, long-term versus short-term goals. What is more important to this older person now? Now that they are, probably the life expectancy is less than 10 years or something like that. When the patients go home, absolutely important to give them a medication list and a plan as to when to stop this medication. If there's no plan at discharge, then to be reviewed by the local doctor. It's a good plan, basically, or to be reviewed by your cardiologist, or to be reviewed by your renal specialist, or whatever. Will of course help with use of inhaled medications, using spacers or devices like that. Use of adherence aids, I will just quickly tell you what we use in Australia. I'll show you some pictures, and some disease stage management programs. So people can get, so we have heart failure management programs where patients with that condition come together, and there are lecture series organized by different healthcare professionals for them. And of course, review of medications. So of course, with the DAAs, the dose administration aid, they were initially designed to be used by the carers. Now, it's not the solution for everything. Now, of course, if you still forget to take medication from a pack or a blister pack, you're still going to be non-adherent to your medication. So they all come with a little pitfall of their own, of course, but then these are fantastic little things that you can give or suggest to your patient. A lot of medications can't be Webster packed. For example, dabigatran, Pradaxa. It is a highly hygroscopic capsule, and it can't be Webster pack, or there was a study done quite recently. If you are to Webster pack it, you have to keep it in the fridge. Now, not everybody might have fridge, for example, so understanding those properties of medications before you suggest such dosage administration aids is quite important as well. And again, as I said, not suitable for all patients. They're expensive things. They're not cheap. But a simple, maybe a plastic box, if the medications are pretty stable at room temperature, then, as a pharmacist, you can just put medications in a 7-day container with Monday, Tuesday on it, and the time of the medication needs to be taken as well. So yeah, I mean, you can simplify things, but they come at a cost for sure. And so we have these medi rolls, which are usually packed by robots or machines in Australia here as well. They all come with a pitfall. Not everybody can read that tiny writing, take on Friday, the 18th of the 12th at 2100 hours. Now, a lot of people might not know what 2100 hours mean. So yeah, so patients should be cognitively able to understand that as well. So these are the blister packs as well. Pretty neat little devices to help the patient. These are tab timers. These are quite good, for especially Parkinson's medications. They just open at the time, so you can see the 0730 in there, like that time. So basically this box is open, but usually it is just closed and locked. And when 7:30 like happens, obviously it just opens one slot and the patient can just take that bit of medication. It's really good for patients who take multiple medications at multiple times, in particular Parkinson's medications. As I've mentioned to you already, discharge planning begins at admission. So if you are, like you're seeing a patient for the first time, you did a medication review, that thought should come to your mind first up. Okay, when they go home, how are they going to look after their medications? For example, you are going to suggest an intervention. For example, we had a patient once who was taking a little extemporaneous preparation of levodopa, and that was suggested by the neurologist during ward rounds, because they had really like end stage Parkinson's disease, and that was supposed to be taken every hour. Now the patient had nobody at home to look after, basically, and of course, they were in no stage to crush 10 tablets of levodopa carbidopa, put a teaspoonful of ascorbic acid in it in a 600 ml bottle. Like, there was too many things to be done. So obviously, these things should come to your mind when you actually see the patient for the first time, or if they are started on a new medication, like say for example midodrine in Australia. Well, now it is registered in Australia, but in good old times it wasn't there. It was it's a, I guess, a third line agent for orthostatic hypotension. And we had to actually ask the patient to come back to hospital to get a prescription filled every time. Now imagine if you have 600 odd patients in a local health district like near Gosford or whatever, the amount of burden that's going to create for the hospital. So these things are very, very important to think beforehand as well. Assessing home scenarios of the patient, obviously, cost implications of what you're going to suggest is very, very, very important. And are they going to require additional help, like larger fonts? Now, we have done weird and wonderful things for our patients before, like, just have one bag which says morning medications, other bag which says night medications, because they just couldn't see. Like, they were like, I'm not going to be able to pop each blister. Can you just do that for me? So we did that in hospital, but then we had to also call their community or local pharmacy and say, hey, can you please make sure you do this for the patient? They're not going to be able to do any other way. So that continuity of care is quite important as well. I'm very mindful of time there. Apologies. Yep, yep. And then we have, of course, new horizons in aged care, like orthogeriatrics or oncogeriatrics or cardiogeriatrics. Where, like, specialized care is given to patients with these conditions. Obviously, we also have a rapid assessment of deteriorating aged in at risk radar departments in Australia as well. So they kind of get that quick referral to GP, and then reduce like a bit of burden from hospital as well, on hospitals as well. We have GEM units, which assess health issues established at a rehabilitation, like they establish a rehab program basically, and reduce the need of residential care, because it's a big cost to the patient, definitely. So hospital initiated medication reviews. So Society of Hospital Pharmacists of Australia, now with their big efforts, you can have hospital-initiated medication reviews in Australia. So a hospital pharmacist can actually have that bit of continuity of care and go to patients' home and do medication reviews as well. And I was very lucky to be the pharmacist who developed the advanced training residency in geriatrics in Australia, our first initiative in Australia here for the advanced training. So yeah, good things are happening in geriatrics. I find myself quite thankful to be a part of it. And these are some useful resources. I'm sure you will get a copy of this presentation. So please feel free to have a look at that. This MSD manual is quite fantastic. It gives a really nice snippet of changes in older adults and how medication management changes as well. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening to me. And I know it's about 3:30 in India. It's 9 o'clock in Australia here, Sydney time. I'm very grateful for this invitation and to be able to speak. Thank you.
Hello, Gauri. It was very nice listening to you, and we did
Thank you.
hear a different perspective about treating geriatric patients, which is your core looks like, and which is you're passionate about it.
Yeah.
So now this forum is open for questions, and Gauri will be honored to answer any of your questions
Yeah.
which will
I
put.
can try. I can try. I think we have Mr. Dr. Sushil Kumar Londhe, who is asking what's the geriatric age considered in India. That's actually a very good question, sir. To be very honest with you, I thought that age might be a bit universal, like 65. I mean, I'm from a Marathi background, so they do these things called as Sati Shanta or whatever. When you become 60, oh, you're too old, let's do this Sati Shanta on you. So I'm in there about 60, 65 might be considered as a geriatric age in India as well.
Officially, Gauri, to tell you something, anyone who completes 60 and enters 61 is
Yep.
supposed to be a senior citizen.
See,
So
there you go. Yep.
so that is what the law out here in India says, and I
Perfect.
think 60 plus would be considered as geriatrics.
There we go. Definitely. Yep.
And then Sati Shanta, what you were telling was
Yes, yes.
it has a little background in the sense that earlier म्हणजे काय असायचं की पूर्वी लोक जास्त जगायचे नाही.
जगाचे नाहीत. Yeah, that's
जगायचे
right.
नाही. तर
Correct, correct.
anyone who would cross 60 would be something who was fortunate enough to reach that.
Correct,
So
correct.
it was
So spot on. Yeah.
it
Thanks,
was a
ma'am, for that
celebration
little
for
insight.
that.
Yes.
And it was also something to make that person feel right. But the other side is Sati Shanta was done only for male and not for the females. Okay.
Ah, see, there you go.
So that's a
Gender
gender bias.
inequality there as well.
Yeah, gender
Oh
bias.
dear.
Gender bias. So I've not
No,
heard, but now the things have changed in last
changed.
few years,
Mhm.
and progressive families from where
That's
probably
fantastic.
you and me come from, we also
Uh-huh.
celebrate Sati for ladies
For
also.
females as well. That's brilliant. Thank you so much for that insight. Like I knew that life expectancy thankfully has gone up. So yeah, thereabouts would be, yeah. And again, age is just a number. Sometimes, as we know that a lot of younger people, younger than 60, of course, have also gotten those geriatric syndromes. So yeah, Emma, thank you for that input.
Okay, since you are involved in the healthcare system out in Australia, I would like to know what is the present scenario of this COVID-19 thing.
Sure. So like in terms of vaccinations or like how we are managing it
Yeah,
or?
yeah.
So I must say in Australia, we are very grateful that, you know, the situation at the moment is very controlled. We do have outbreaks here as well, obviously. So uh, we have something called as contact tracers in Australia. So that's a very good question. Thank you for asking that actually, because a friend of mine from Hunter New England Healthcare District in Newcastle is actually a contact tracer. She's a registered pharmacist, and what these contact tracers do is that if a person is COVID-19 positive, or say they are in a hotel quarantine or something like that, they've come from UK and they're in hotel quarantine, but they are now positive of COVID, and sadly somebody else got COVID because of them, say for example a quarantine worker or somebody. These contact tracers actually trace each connections this positive case have had, and backtrack it to isolate these patients basically. So this friend of mine who is a pharmacist has been a contact tracer for all 2020, which was just fantastic. We are in process of starting vaccination. So because I work with aged people, so I work in geriatrics, I'll be in that category to get the vaccine pretty much earlier on. So yeah, that is quite interesting. They were also talking about effectiveness of vaccine in over 65s, but that question was put to sleep a couple of days ago, and they found it was equally I guess helpful in people over 65. So yeah, we in that way we are quite fortunate here that outbreak, as it happens, it's controlled quite quickly.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Nice, thank
And
you.
the contact tracing, which you are talking about, a pharmacist doing it.
Yes.
When we were like India was in the earlier stage, the contact tracing was done by our police force,
Yep.
and which was excellent. And
Great.
I know few of the contact tracing what they have done in our own family. Okay,
Wow.
so they did a very great job of
That's
doing it.
brilliant. Hmm.
So since the population is less, then a pharmacist can be deputed. But a country like India with so much vast population,
Yes. Yes.
tracing becomes a complex uh,
Very complex.
process, and which uh, the with the help of the police and other, it was traced
Correct.
very well.
I guess the whole vaccination program in India is going to be one of the best in the world, obviously, given the population and the amount of people that need to be vaccinated. It's going to be an epic undertaking, and one can only imagine that from anywhere else in the world.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I request all the delegates to kindly switch on their videos for a screenshot. Thank you so much.
Nice. Thank you.
With this, we have come to the end of today's QIP sessions. I believe all the sessions have helped everyone. Let's meet tomorrow for another great session. Till then, bye.
Thank you, Gauri ma'am, for accepting our invitation and presenting a very wonderful talk.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you,
Thank
Gauri.
you.
Nice
Thank you.
interacting with you.
Thank you so much. It revived my memories of my B Farm years in India, interacting with everybody, which was
I
fantastic.
mean, just interesting question is, from where did you do your BPharm?
I did it actually from MIP, Maharashtra Institute of
Oh,
Pharmacy.
MIT.
Hmm, Very next door to Pune College of Pharmacy.
I
Yes,
know. And
yes,
Dr.
yes, yes.
Parak was the principal when you were there?
Yes, that's right. Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes. So now, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm
Okay.
honored.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.